Everybody ready? Uh-oh. We're filming this? Two? Welcome to the June meeting of the Cornerstone Genealogical Society. Let us salute the 15-star, 15-stripe, 1796 flag of the United States. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, it is our pleasure tonight to have one of our own, Glenn Toothman III, talk about, I think, one of his favorite topics, the Rain Day Boys from World War I.
This is the only place I'm going to say my real name is Glenn Roy Jacob Thornton Toothman III. Don't just say Glenn, not in a genealogy situation here. Because my great-grandmother, when she birthed my grandfather, said she wasn't ever doing that again. So she piled all the names on, and that's how I have all those names. My kids all wince whenever somebody asks me, what's your name? Because they don't know what I'm going to say. Whether I'm going to give them the full speech or just a short version. Well, thanks for coming. I appreciate it. Yes, this is a topic I've had a chance to talk about a couple of times. And ultimately, though, what I decided here to do this evening was just kind of go through a series of pictures that are meaningful to the process. And this was all process to come to learn about the Rain Day Boys, as we've called them. They didn't formally get that name, I think, until Candace Buchanan, and I decided that's who they needed to be. So we did everything we could. We registered it on the internet, and we think that's an appropriate thing, and you'll understand certainly why, given that most of these individuals lost their lives on July 29th. This picture, though, is where we got to begin, and I never, hardly ever give this talk without this person being here. This is Candace Buchanan, if you don't know. Candace is wonderfully employed as a reference librarian at the Library of Congress. So she's moved up in this world. Her resume is pretty strong at this point. But I recognized that early on in my career with Candace, that she was pretty tenacious about research. And so 24 years ago, I hired her to come into Memory Medallion and help do life profiles, genealogy profiles. And I then have never turned back, meaning we've worked together for 24 years doing life profiles. And one day at Memory Medallion, I came to Candace and I said, I would really like to do medallions on some kind of local project that the community could relate to and that we might have fun to get involved in. And she says, well, I got something in mind. I said, well, that's why I'm talking to you. What do you have in mind? She says, well, my relatives, Bert Buchanan, he died in a battle in France along with 17 or 18 other young people from Greene County. I said, really? I don't know about that. And why don't I know about that? That's pretty important. She says, well, I think why don't we do some research? She goes, I don't know a whole lot about it. Well, that was the beginning of us starting research in a big way about those boys that were killed in France. And it was sort of divine intervention, because ultimately I had a relative, William Throgmorton. My mother was a Throgmorton that was one of the Rain Day Boys. My wife had a relative, Hallie Closser. She's Diane Closser. And then Candace's mother, Donna, she had a family member, Staggers was Lawrence Staggers. So interestingly, this tight-knit group then, we all had somebody a part of this Rain Day Board, and that only motivated us all that much more about finding out what we could find out. And so we leave no stone unturned. We've been everywhere. Candace and I and Donna and Diane, my wife, several times to France, and finally, ultimately got it figured out where this really happened and sort of how it happened, and that's what I'd like to share. So I told Candace I would begin this presentation focused on her and meeting the first French people, or the first Frenchmen we've met in France, and there they are. And you can tell she was upset by I think that was the biggest grin I've ever seen on her in the whole travels that we have. And so this was right in the town of Fresnay-en-Tardenois, where the headquarters, right before the Rain Day battle, I'm going to call it, occurred. The headquarters was in this little town. And so that's where we started. We knew that much, that this was where it was, and we knew the hill number done by the military. So this is where Candace and I, Diane and Donna, and our good friend Muriel is a wonderful dual citizenship, French and American. And we had no language barrier. That makes it easy, when you can talk and kid around and all that. The only thing about the Muriel is she's afraid of dogs. And I said, Muriel, I'll go knock on doors to see who will talk to us, but you need to talk, because my French is not very good. The first door I knocked on had a little bulldog come running out the door, and I thought Muriel was going to faint. I was going to lose her services immediately, but it didn't happen, and that was just the beginning of all of the fun and education that we had. And so I told Candace we would start with her. We're in the town now here at Fresnay-en-Tardenois, and this was Muriel is in the blue shirt behind big old me, and yet the guy to the left here in the black is the feature that I can't give enough wonderful kudos to. His name is Joel Pauls, and he lives in Fresnay-en-Tardenois. And we were just, meaning Muriel and I, were just trying to find our way of where might these soldiers been when this was headquarters. So we were just walking the streets. At this point, I think Candace didn't leave the mules. She was still at the mules, and Muriel and I are trying to find history at this point. And this is the first picture of Joel. Joel has become an incredible individual in the quest, and he knew nothing about all that took place in the vicinity of where they live. And now, I think he's eligible for a doctorate in World War I history. He has dived into it so completely, it's wonderful. And so here are the three musketeers trying to get something learned about this battle. And so Joel, in the last picture, he said he'd worked all night. He's a person that works midnight shift. He said, let me go tell my wife and you follow me in the car. And so that's what we did. And this is where we were along the road, and that is, I better use technology here if I can. Yeah. Well, it's going to wash out in the light. This is Grimpettes Woods at the top of the hill. So we're taking this picture from near Cormont, which is where the soldiers were station. The officers were in Fresnel-Tardenois. That was headquarters. The soldiers resided about 3 miles away in the little town of Cormont, and then the plan was take that hill. And on the other side of that hill is a little town called Sergé. And so they wanted to get through the woods and on the other side and liberate Sergé. So this picture's kind of appropriate from that perspective. And what you can see is their corn's as good as ours is in Ohio. You know, this is farm country. And that's what I can say about our soldiers. They felt home. When they got to this place, you know, this wasn't Paris and this wasn't all the hubbub of the fancy museums and everything that were certainly still there, beginning in their day. They got to be in the country, and that's what they loved, being that. So Joel is a treasure. You know, he has been the absolute treasure for us. Now, as I was sharing before y'all came, there are two things that my grandchildren interfere with. You guaranteed they're going to goober any clothes you got on, but the other thing is they're going to interfere with any technology you lay down. And I made the mistake of doing this presentation and laying my phone down and going outside, and before it shut off, my little grandson, he's in there going like, so you have to bear with me in that this is a presentation that my grandson Kieran and I put together. This picture I love. This was the last reunion of Company K, held at the Armory, and this was in 1974. And this was the picture taken on the steps. And I got them all numbered because I can't recognize one of them, and I'm pretty good about staring at pictures. And before you leave, definitely look at the picture that I put up outside, which is an old photograph of the soldiers, you know, in time before they left to go to France. So ultimately, bear with my pictures. I had these all in a nice order until Kieran decided he wanted them for his own.
Were you shopping for shoes?
Yeah, I'm doing birthday. Okay, this is interesting and important. These are the locations that are critical. So if you're going to travel to France, Fresnel, as you can see, Fresnel-Tardenois is where headquarters. The soldiers were stationed in Cormont, Grimpettes Woods, and they were to liberate Sergé. And so that's the sequence of events. The important thing is here with the map of France. Here's Paris, all right? The boys came to England by ship, and then they crossed the strait over to Calais, France, and then they eventually ended up in this area, which is where this Grimpettes Woods ends up being. So it's about 45 minutes to an hour outside of Paris, but it's out into the farm country, and it's, you know, wonderful farm country. It's a little more level than Greene County is, but it reminds me so much of Greene County. It's nice and wonderfully green. So our boys, though, first went, and I have a picture out again on the table out there, to Camp Hancock in Georgia. That's where they left the armory here, went to Camp Hancock for training, and then ultimately from Camp Hancock were shipped north to the New Jersey, New York area, where they ultimately went on a ship called the Esonia. And then from the Esonia, that took them to England, and then ultimately to France. So one of the things I definitely want to talk about, and at the end of this, I have a 5-minute reel that'll go through from the beginning to end, the highlights of this story, and so you'll get a more organized synopsis of what's ultimately happened here. I want to kind of talk about things that don't generally get talked about, and yet I think are important. One of the things that definitely matters to me is a man by the name of Clevenger. He was ultimately the person that survived, and he was friends to all these guys, and he was the person writing letters home. There we are with the pictures of our Rain Day Boy relatives. My wife's far right, that's Hallie Closser. Me next, that's William Throckmorton. That's Candace, that's Bert Buchanan, and then that's Donna, and that's Staggers. And so we're standing at the monument. You can see it's in French. And it's out though, that's Grimpettes Woods behind us. And so this was really our first opportunity to get it right. We didn't know exactly where Grimpettes was, and until Joel made sure we did when it's all said and done. So the first person to perish was James Farrell, and that's why our VFW is named James Farrell VFW. He actually died on July 28th, and he was a courier. So he was a person that would take messages from headquarters to Cormont where the troops were, and yet what happened is I come to understand, I thought it was artillery at first, but the French corrected and said planes drop bombs. And it was bombs from planes that ended up bombing Fresnay and Tardenois, and they hit the location where the American officers were plotting strategy, and it killed 3 of the officers, and that's what immediately put Martin in charge. And the French love to talk about it, that why did Martin survive? It's because he was taking the bathroom break in the peach orchard. And so that's what the French love to say. He was pissing in the peach orchard. That's what saved him. So when nature calls, don't ignore it. Was the moral of their story. And so though that put Martin right to the top of the heap with responsibility. This time of year there, though, it was extremely wet. It was rain, rain, rain. So muddy, old muddy roads. And they could not, the Americans could not get their artillery up where they wanted it to because of the roads being so muddy. And so the orders were to begin this battle on a particular day, yet the orders also were to shell it with artillery, this location first, but they had no artillery yet there arrived, so they decided to go ahead and go with the orders, you know? And so early in the morning on the 29th, they tried to get this thing done, but it was a slaughter. What I want to read to you is Clevenger was the person that wrote home to all of these soldiers, families, you know. None of the Rain Day boys were married, and so it wasn't as though they had wives waiting, but they certainly had parents waiting for word. I want to read to you then the part that Clevenger wrote. It was July 28th when we first went over the top. As a united battalion with companies I and K in the lead, I went over with a patrol first, and we ran into several machine gun fire and had to dig in. Then we were recalled and started a general attack. We pushed forward steadily on the 28th and crossed the Oric River, which you could jump across. It wasn't really a river. And our company lost one at that time and a few wounded. But early morning on the 29th is when we started our next attack up the hill northeast of the Oric. The top of the hill is wooded and was full of Boche and machine gun nests, trench mortars, 77s. Our advance was up a gentle slope some quarter of a mile long and absolutely no protection. Shrapnel, high explosives, and all sorts of pig iron, gas shells, etc. were flying around us and occasionally found its mark. But we advanced within 200 yards of the wooded crest before anything else opened upon us. Then perdition let loose, and the scene was absolutely indescribable. In 5 minutes, the earth was heaped with dead and dying, and what was left of us were lying there firing at the hidden machine gun nests and awaiting what seemed certain death. I shall never forget my feelings during the next 2 hours. German snipers in the trees taking pot shots, machine gun buzzing around like swarm of bees, and the shells bursting in front, in the rear, and on either side of me with a crashing sound that made it seem as though brain and skull would be torn apart. 3 men on my left, Sennheiser, Klosser, and Murphy, all Greene Countyans, were killed as we lay there, and several on my right. Once in a while, between shell bursts, the cries of the wounded could be heard. The most terrible part of the battle was this. Then one almost welcomed the cannon's roar again. At last, after the slaughter had become terrible, we were ordered to fall back, but it seemed impossible to ever do so in the face of the terrible fire. I watched men started to run, but they never made it very many steps until a bullet caught them. When I reached the old position at the Oric River, I found some 70 men out of our company of 240 were left. That's something. So that's the message that he wrote back to the newspaper. And that was in the local newspaper, that account. What an incredible account. You just can't hardly imagine that he went, what they all went through. Those are my cookies that the grandkids had me make. Okay, now I'm going to get to the pictures that matter. This is Hallie Klosser. Hallie was an older one of the Rain Day Boys. And, you know, he had a chance to not go because he'd already served, and yet he elected to go over, but he never came back. This is Candace Buchanan's relative. This is Bert Buchanan. Bert was killed in battle on the 29th. This is Lawrence Staggers. This is Donna's relative. Bert is buried in Greenmount Cemetery. So Hallie Closser is buried in Oakmont Cemetery here. And Lawrence Staggers is buried in a cemetery, family cemetery, out near Ryerson Park. Now, Candace and I have tracked down all of these guys somewhere in the world. There were a couple whose bodies were never found, and the only remembrance that they have is on a brass plaque over in France. I'm a member, as a result of all of this group. So I've been up close and personal to the hardware and equipment that got used in World War I. And these are from a group called East Coast Doughboys. And they're out of New York City. And so if you want to run with them, you better know your history, because they are all very well educated, actively participate, and they take their mission of remembrance very seriously. This is William Throckmorton. This is my relative. His story was he was wounded on the 29th and taken to the hospital. And then so prevalent that time of our existence was the flu, you know. Many died of the flu. Well, his injuries compounded to the point where he was on the ship to come home and he passed out. So they took him off the ship, took him back to the hospital, and he died. And so his family, you know, Clevenger had written the family a letter, he's on his way home. Well, not really. He never made it to be home. So, but he is buried in Greenmount Cemetery. Father's Day, this is me and my father. This is the interesting perspective. I wanted to see a German cemetery over in Europe. And, you know, that's what they look like. They're very plain in comparison to the American cemeteries that are there. But I felt in order to do justice to the whole experience of understanding World War I, what did they do with the enemy? And they did have their cemeteries like this.
In France?
Yeah, this is in France. Now, they're off the beaten trail, and they're not touted like our American cemeteries are. This is just a different perspective from the entrance to this cemetery.
Are they marked, Glenn, or they have their names on
Yeah,
the crosses?
they have a little, it's in German though, and but they do. Now, this is Joel and I at Lafayette's grave. Now, the significance of Lafayette's grave, and I'm holding the picture of my relative, Kenneth Toothman. He wasn't in the Rain Day Boys company, but the reason that this picture is significant, it was advertised, written about how when Pershing came with his army to France, the first thing he wanted to do was to be sure they went to Lafayette's grave and tell Lafayette, we've come to thank you, because the French helped us during our time of revolution. And so Pershing didn't let that be forgotten. And so if you go to Pershing's grave, there's all kinds of dollar bills, American dollars, people leave writing in memory of particular family or soldiers. So the interesting reason I'm holding Kenneth's picture, Kenneth Toothman was from Fairmont, West Virginia. My father was born in Harrison County. All the West Virginians talk about counties, where you're from. And so Kenneth was raised in Fairmont. He was the first West Virginian to be killed. And so that was pretty significant across the state. And yet he was the first West Virginian because he was a member of those first troops that went over there. And he was a part of Pershing addressing Lafayette. So that's why I'm holding Kenneth's picture at Lafayette's tombstone. This is the World War I memorial in Washington, D.C. It's a dramatic depiction from left to right of a soldier being inducted into service, and then all of the trials and tribulations the soldier goes through until on the very far right side of it, he lays down his gun and comes home, and he's greeted by a family member on the far right. It's a very interesting and moving tribute. So this is the logo of those East Coast Doughboys, and they were, as Candace and I were also, at the opening of the World War I memorial. Here are all of the Rain Day Boys put together in a picture. And again, we'll see a little more of that. But interestingly enough, most of them came home. This is Pershing, at Pershing Park. This is where the memorial is in D.C. When I first started all this, there was no World War I memorial. This was the only thing that existed in Washington, D.C. to honor World War I, was this statue of Pershing. This is the wonderful group of French citizens that Joel introduced us to. And you see they're holding the book that Candace and I authored about the Rain Day Boys, and they're having a toast to the Rain Day Boys at their location. Terry might recognize this, her service. Terry wonderfully and Carlin accompanied the second trip that Candace and I organized to go to France, and that's Candace with her back to me, back to us and talking to me. That gentleman whose back we see here is Doug Lee, president of Waynesburg University. He gave a talk. I asked him to at this particular dedication. But these are the French citizens, and how did they, coming to the location at Grimpettes Woods, and how did they get there? They walked. They walked from their villages, and you could hear, the footsteps of them coming. And then it was such a wonderful.
Is that a significant place?
Pardon me?
That place where you were greeted at, right there, is that a certain point?
Yes.
Which is?
That's where that monument, you remember that?
Yes, yes.
Red stone?
Yes.
That red stone's off to the right.
Oh, okay.
Right there. This, though, is part of that. This is also there. The red stone is to the right of this picture. But on this day, the French put all these flags, and each mayor, the mayor of Cormont, the mayor of Fresnay-Tardenois, the mayor of Sergey, and then the mayor of a place called Ronchère, that's where the supplies came in from the railroad. Those four mayors and those came and all laid wreaths at this monument. And you know, it was just emotionally overwhelming to see how much they appreciated what our soldiers had done for them. They definitely have not forgotten. Here we are, each one of us is holding someone that was part of the Rain Day Boys, and you should recognize this person right here in the room, and then the other person's in the back row back there. We were able to attend one of the dedication ceremonies at the cemetery nearby, and they had these kind of reenactors standing at attention throughout the service. So, you know, there's nothing like living history, walking past these soldiers and believing that they were part of the crew. Here we are all, our traveling group, and we're at the church. This is in Fresnay Tardenois, and this is where the bombing, the airplane artillery happened that killed our officers. So we took a picture in front of that. And that's picture we're holding is James Farrell. That's where he was killed. The importance of this picture is just to give you the dimensions of, you know, one is in England where they boarded a ship, came across the channel. 3 is in Calais, and then 4 is where they got to have a train ride, and they ultimately ended up down there by 5, which is where the battle happened. They all left from this building, you know, this is still there, and that's what's always fascinating to me, that, you know, there is history among us still. This is the ship they came across on, the Esonia. The interesting thing about this ship is, on its way back to the state to get another load of men, it got torpedoed and sunk. And, you know, that could have happened easily on the way over, and it didn't. But it did happen on the way back. That ship was sunk. So ultimately, here we all are in France, enjoying a meal, but the purpose of this picture is, this is Muriel on the front left. She was our French-speaking. Now, this is a time before the Grimeses got to travel with us. This is our trip before. The fun we had, though, when the whole group got together and went back, is none of us were too good about French, but we all tried a little bit. And we used to make fun of one another about how good our French was from day to day. By the time it was all over, I ended up realizing I just need to keep my mouth shut and go get Muriel, because I think there would have been international conflict if they kept listening to us. These are the 2 officers when they left Waynesburg, Martin and Montgomery, but Montgomery was relieved of his duty getting into France, and he sort of got elevated into the ranks of planning, and so he wasn't a part of the tragedy that occurred in Fresnay and Tardenois. And then this just is the map showing you perspective. You see Fresnay and Tardenois on the left, then where the men stayed there in Cormont and Grimpettes Woods, and then up to Sergé. And this is a military map, a copy of a military map. This picture is significant because this is how the Germans saw the soldiers. See the small trees in the middle of this picture on the left-hand side? That's along the Ourcq River. As I told you, you could jump across that Oak River as nothing. Our soldiers had to come up this slope into the Germans that were embedded into the Grimpettes Woods. What a slaughter. I mean, I just can't believe that they even tried that. But ultimately, a couple of days went by, they kept at it, and we finally did take the woods over. And, that's Clevenger. He's the guy that responsible for writing all of the letters back home. Now, I just want to play you the 5-minute encapsulation of everything and ultimately let you have any questions you might have. Give me a moment here now.
History knows those pictured here as the Rain Day Boys, 18 young soldiers, all members of the 28th Division, 110th Infantry, Company K, out of Waynesburg, who were killed or mortally wounded in a battle in France during World War I on July 29, 1918. That day would have been this community's largest loss of soldier life in a single day. By September 1917, the men of Company K finally received their orders to proceed towards training that would eventually take them to World War I. They did in fact leave from this building, which was the armory then. It still stands today in Waynesburg. As the boys left the armory on September 7, 1917, they marched down Washington Street, headed towards the train station at the bottom of the hill. Crowds of Waynesburg and Greene County people lined the street the whole way down, and this picture depicts the massive amount of people who gathered at the train station to bid them farewell. The train ride took them to Camp Hancock in Augusta, Georgia. This is a location where they began their indoctrination to soldiery. They were digging trenches, conditioning to endure poisonous gas, becoming marksmen with their Model 1903 rifles, all in preparation to soon head to France. They completed their training in April of 1918 when they got their orders to depart for Germany. They traveled by rail north to New York, New Jersey area, where they boarded this ship, the Ausonia, where they would cross the Atlantic Ocean to Liverpool, England, then eventually down to Calais, France, to begin their confrontation of the German army. By July 28, 1918, the soldiers of Company K had arrived near the small town of Fresnay-en-Tardenois, preparing for battle of the next day. This particular town was company headquarters. Pictured here is James Farrell. He was a young courier running orders from headquarters here in Fresnay to the battlefield. On July 28, 1918, company headquarters was shelled by German artillery, and James Farrell, along with others, lost their life. He was the first one of Company K to perish. The men of Company K were camped in a small town called Cormont. The view here in this picture shows the Oak River, which was not much of a river, but something that needed to be crossed in order to ascend to the top of the hill in the distance, which was Grimpettes Woods. The battle that cost the boys their lives was something that took place as they ascended towards the Grimpettes Woods. This view shows what the Germans saw as they would look down upon the Rain Day Boys and Company K attempting to come up this slope. The small tree line in the middle of this picture direction from where the Rain Day Boys were coming. This is a short video clip that shows where the boys were camped in Cormont, the view then, as they attempted to ascend up to the tree-lined top of Grimpettes Woods. Up near Grimpettes Woods, the French have prepared this memorial that honors the men of Company K and fellow Pennsylvania soldiers that attacked and took Grimpettes Woods. On July 29th, 2018, 100 years after the Battle of Grimpettes Woods, where the Rain Day Boys were killed, these members of the Greene County community or families connected to those boys visited the actual battlefield. Here they are holding Rain Day Boy pictures that were connected to them.
In closing, we would like to remember each of these Greene County fallen soldiers: Albert Buchanan, Harold Carey, Hallie Closser, Harry Dunn, John Duvall, James Farrell, Floyd Pickman, Benjamin Manning, Frederick Marshall, George McNeely, Francis Moore, Charles Murphy, John Payton, Walter Riggle, Lawrence Staggers, William Throckmorton, Russell Yoders, Norman Zanizer. We invite you to learn more about each of the Rain Day Boys and the story of their battle at raindayboys.com, where you can see individual profiles and links to archival records and photographs shared by their families, local repositories, and research in the United States and France. Thank you very much.
There you have it. That's the Rain Day Boys. Any questions? Well, I appreciate the opportunity to share it with you. Only 4 of those boys didn't come home buried. A couple of them were never found, meaning that their bodies were not found. And then 2 of them are actually buried in the cemeteries over there. They were, you know, the interesting thing is families were given an opportunity to bring their soldier home. But like Hayden, one of the Rain Day Boys, he didn't have any family left. So he stayed over there. Meaning there was no one to make arrangements for him to come back to the United States. So he is buried over there. But most of our Rain Day Boys got brought back and are in various cemeteries, many of them in Greenmount, several in Oakmont, and then you know, just different places around. And that's certainly one interesting thing to do, is to track them down and stand where their remains are. And I encourage you to do that. If you go to greenconnections.com, you can look and see all the information we have. We've done the biographies of each one of these soldiers. Candace is a certified genealogist, and she wasn't going to put out just anything about them, but their whole history, who their family was, where they came from, and where their remains are. So I encourage you to look at that information as you have time and learn more about it, learn more about the details.
Glenn, how did that battle figure, you know, you're toward the end of the war there,
Yeah.
just a couple months to go. Did that battle figure in the culmination of the war at all, or?
Well, you know, historians mark that time as the Second Battle of the Marne, if you're doing research, you know, and what was existing past Sergey was the railroad depot. If Grimes may recall, one of the things that Joel did for us took us on a little trip down the supply line. And so that's ultimately what that battle was about, was getting up and out closer to the Marne River, and the opportunity to bring supplies in as needed. So that was its significance.
Continuing to push the Germans back?
Yeah.
To the other side of the
Yeah.
Marne?
Yeah. Yeah.
How long after they were killed were they able to be home?
Years. Some 4 years would have been the soonest, and then some even longer than that. But mostly around between 4 and 7 years, would bring them back. And there were always ceremonies back here for the burial of these boys. Meaning you saw the train station, train station crowd. That's the wonderful thing about World War I soldiers, is they were considered the best and the brightest we had. They didn't take just anybody. You had to be sort of the top of your, physically fit and mentally fit, and that's how you got to go. The problem is that hit the community pretty hard, to lose this cream of the crop from here. So they weren't easily forgotten.
Was there ever an investigation of why the unit advanced without proper artillery support?
Yes, it's this whole thing of an order was given and you follow orders, even in the face of absolute ridiculous suicide, and there are books out there, volumes. Martin made sure that as much information as could be collected, so there's like an 8-volume set of books about the whole World War I campaign. And, the other thing about it was our boys were relieving the French, and the French were so anxious to get out of there. They gave us bad information as they were leaving, but it was because we didn't speak the language, so there was a real breakdown as to what they knew, meaning we sent out a reconnaissance unit to understand what kind of bridge needed to be built across the Ourcq. Talk about bad information. That was a big waste of time. Our men could just jump over that Ourcq River at any part of that. And so that's the kind of thing, though, that ended up being one misfit bit of information after another in their opportunity to go up there. And so us did not really understand how well dug in the Germans were in that Grimpettes Woods. And, you can go through it. The people that own it, they're such lovely people. Say, go and see whatever. Well, there are canisters and artillery shells and all kinds of stuff in that woods. But that woods is, I don't know if any of you are, they were talking about the ghosts of Gettysburg. What about the ghosts of Grimpettes Woods? They're definitely there to me when it's all said and done. Tragedy, though. I can't imagine what they had to do to follow that order, because there was no cover. We're talking about wheat fields. And so, just like I showed you, when the Germans looked down, that's what it looked like, with our soldiers trying to come up. And so it's taking pot shots. But thanks for the opportunity to share, and I encourage you to go online and look more. And next, we'll get Terry and Carlin to come and talk about their experiences with the French menu. We were so entertained with trying to order. Cheeseburgers don't exist over there. So, but we did have fun trying.
Freedom fries?
Well, freedom fries, and, and I'm serious. Joel is such a wonderful person. He would welcome anybody. And if he knew you were from Greene County coming there, oh my goodness, they would do nothing but the royal treatment for us. I mean, those people totally appreciated the fact that our boys came from, to them, God knows where you all came from to help liberate us. You know, they were so emotionally appreciative. And it's part of their psyche. You know, even the young people presently are taught to respect what our soldiers did for them.
All right. Thank you, Glenn.
You know,